Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Getting a bit of a build-up with the old requests, the questions and answers sort of thing. So I thought I'd have a session going over some of those. I'm hoping to get all of them, quite honestly. I do keep track, although I may miss one now and again. A lot of questions can just be answered in the comment where they're asked. You know, they don't really need any elaboration, but some of them are better done as part of a video. So I'm going to knock out a few of those today, and that will include a chat about keeping and looking after Phalaenopsis. Now, I may not be the best person to ask about that sort of thing, because firstly I haven't got many and they don't grow very well for me, but I do know how they're supposed to be, if you see what I mean. Once upon a time I had loads. Before this grow room existed, all my plants were in the house on windowsills, and I had a lot at that time. But gradually over the years they've either been given away or died, basically, keeled over for one reason or another. And the main reason they don't do well for me out here in this grow room is it's too cold in the winter. It really is as simple as that. The other environmentals here are great. They've got airflow, they've got good humidity, they get the right light, they're shaded by other plants so they're not in the brightest light. They've got everything going for them except for that bit, and that's the main reason why a lot of them went down. Anyway, I'll do that in a minute. Let's knock the other ones out first. And the first one is the Encyclia Cordigera. How to look after this? Well, first of all, we don't do what I did and actually imagine that it belongs to the Oncidium Alliance. What a dork. How that happened, I don't know. But it did, and as a consequence I potted it up in small bark with a mix of sphagnum in there. Of course it stayed wet, which I thought was fine. It's an Oncidium type, yeah, it'll do great. Well, no, it didn't. Lost its root system, slowed right down, and at the time I realised was bordering on keeling over, quite honestly. But I just thought one day, this is going wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong with what I'm doing here. So I went and had another look and found out a couple of major points. Firstly, it's in the Cattleya Alliance, so should be treated accordingly. And secondly, it has a serious dislike to being damp around its base. It needs air around the base of the pseudobulbs, and it needs to dry quickly. It's just one of those that's got that little bit of fussy about it in that department. So anyway, we cleaned off all the old roots, which left next to nothing. Repotting video not that long ago, actually. And then we put it in chunky bark in a clay pot. So it's now got as much air as it needs all round the base, dries nice and quickly, and since then, quite honestly, it's going mad. So it obviously worked. It's producing a complete new root system, and a lot of these roots are coming out of the older bulbs. They're not even relevant to the new growths I've got. So it's recreating its root system actively and quickly. They're even getting right down into the pot now. So we've got a good root system coming on. We've got new growths here. There's another one here. There's one coming up in the middle there somewhere. And there's another one round the side here. So at least 4 growths starting at the moment, which in turn will produce even more roots. So that's the fundamental thing with this, is air around the roots. Don't allow it to stay wet. That seems to be what's worked for me. Light level for this one, up near Cattleya light, possibly even into that level, but I'm not pushing it that much. The light level this one gets is a bit less than my highlight Cattleyas, so perhaps a bit more than most of the Oncidiums, but not quite into that real highlight level. Somewhere in between. That seems to be working okay. These don't like dry air. Then most orchids don't like dry air, so that take that across the board, but it's not a real high humidity type that doesn't do well without it. It'll do okay with average humidity. Again, if your Cattleyas are doing okay, this probably will. There are no signs of sheaths or any signs of these older bulbs, the mature ones, actually blooming. It has bloomed for me a long time ago, and then it started going downhill, so it stopped. So I've got to wait for these new growths to mature, at which point it should bloom. I see no reason why it shouldn't bloom on those new growths with the backup of that root system and a much happier plant. but it's a way off. You know, they're only just starting. But I was pleased to see them. You know, this plant was bordering on being lost. It wasn't far off. There was virtually no roots left on it. And for this number of leaves and this number of bulbs, a lack of a root system could have been, you know, the end of this plant. So that one's coming on well. That was that one. Somebody asked if I've got any spikes coming on the Vandas. Well, first of all, I've only got 2 now. The large white one went to somebody else. So I've got the one that has the orange blooms and the one that has the large purpley blue blooms. Both of these are doing leaves at the moment. No sign of spikes yet, but a good flush of new leaves at the top of the plant, pushing on quite quickly. And the bluey one, this is going mad in the root department at the moment. Even the old roots are branching. So at the moment, it's really extending its root system all over the place, which is good. It's even got some new ones coming out of the stem. So good new, you know, an excessive root system for the size of the plant. And hopefully we'll see some spikes on those in the next month or so. But I'm guessing, you know, need new leaves to get spikes, basically, you know. So the leaves are coming. They're doing their thing. Both got a reasonable root system, so we should get spikes down the line. What else was I asked about? Oh yes, the Zygopetalum. Somebody asked if I've still got that. Is it still with us? You doubters. Well, given my record on the Zygopetalums, I can understand the question. But it's this little one down here. And at one point I thought it was going down. It's been repotted this year, so it's in new media now. That media it was in was starting to get a bit soggy. The good new growth that it produced has actually produced a pseudo bulb. It's a bit smaller than the one next to it, but it at least produced a bulb. The other little new growth that it did stalled, so that's not going to mature. That is a bit wobbly. That might even have a bit of rot around the base, but it is now producing another good strong one, which hopefully will be another bulb. How far off blooming? Not a clue. I don't know how big this plant's supposed to get before it thinks about blooming. But it's growing now, so it's still with us. Which, given my record on the zygos, is a bonus, we'll call it. So that's that one. Then we'll get on to the Phalaenopsis. This is a general chat about looking after Phalaenopsis. Where you look after them, like in the home, in some sort of grow space, in a greenhouse, will vary considerably, and those variables can cause some of your problems. Oh, well, we'll start with this one, because somebody did specifically ask how the sweet memory was doing. Well, the first bloom's just about to open. As a plant, it had 4 leaves. It's now only got 2, and I've got some patchiness going on here, which I think is a magnesium issue, but that's on its way. And when I get the magnesium sulfate, I'm going to pick on some plants. This will be one of them. Yeah, these leaves are pale. They're not meant to be that colour. Now, some of them are old leaves on the oldest pseudobulbs. They're probably dying back. Just that's what happens. But I'm going to pick on some that seem to have a green issue. You know, ones that should be a better colour leaf than they've got. And that's usually a symptom of magnesium, as long as it's not old leaves dying off, you know. So I'm going to give them a foliar feed and a good go, and then we'll watch that little set of plants and see whether it works or not. And if it works, then it says, well, that was the problem. If it doesn't work, then it wasn't the problem. So we'll have a go at that. Right, so that's that one done. This has produced I'll do spikes on Phalaenopsis first. Many say don't cut the spike. And quite honestly, if the plant's healthy and well fed, those spikes should stay green and extend in a lot of cases. Not all, but in a lot of cases. But why I don't do that is the previous spike on here did its blooms and then it extended with one bloom on the end. And then that bloom died off and I got another couple. And you end up with a couple of little blooms on the end of a really long spike a long way away from the plant. And to me, at that point, it does not look pretty anymore. It's lost its elegance. That's not what the spike should look like. Yeah? So I took my spike off. It had a little bit of a rest, produced a few new roots, and then produced a brand new spike, which is going to have some, it's got a branch here with some buds, a branch here with some buds, and a cluster here. Close into the plant, and a nice group of blooms. It will look good again. Then after that set of blooms have gone, it may start to extend. And I may let it do it for the first flush of blooms, but then I'll probably take the spike off. Yeah? Now if your spike starts to die back and starts turning brown, you've got two things to think of. Why is it doing it? Yeah? Well, it is said that if a plant is well fed with correct nutrition, the spike should stay green. That's not true of all Phalaenopsis. Some of them don't extend. They just don't. They have their flush of blooms and they die back. So it's natural. Yeah? But many do. So if you've got one of those that normally does and the spike starts to die back, it's probably a nutrition issue. Yeah? Now, reasons for nutrition issues. First of all, you're not giving it enough or the right sort or in a form that it can use. Yeah? So always when you get a problem with hydration or you think you've got a nutrition issue, get down in the pot. Most issues with orchids occur below ground, not above ground. And quite honestly, that's almost across the board. Issues with orchids tend to be in the pot. Things that can go wrong. It's been in the pot too long for a start, and the media is starting to become acidic. That will take the root system down eventually, sometimes quite slowly and sometimes quite quickly. Yeah? Now, Phalaenopsis are epiphytes, like most of the orchids in here. Yeah? As a consequence, they don't come from anywhere where they would stay wet for any length of time. But they do come from tropical forests in the main, where they would get absolutely soaked, and then they dry off. And therein lies the care for those types of plants. They don't like to stay wet all the time. So in the pot, they need to have air around the roots, and they need to dry reasonably quickly. And the lower the temperatures get, the harder that is to achieve. And often that's the problem with Phalaenopsis, especially in the UK. People trying to grow in greenhouses or in grow spaces like this, the cost of keeping them at their right temperature in heating is just too much. So I don't do it. I go down to 12 degrees C in here in the winter. That's too cold for most Phalaenopsis. I've got one that likes it, but the others don't. So they slow right down and they object. They don't like getting cold in the main. My Sideria japonica doesn't mind. In fact, it actually enjoys it, and it's produced the best spike ever this spring, following that winter. So most of the problems occur at time of purchase. The mass producers, they're grown in perfect conditions. Yeah, they've got all the growth hormones, they've got the boosters and the conditions. Everything's just right. They want them out the door, in bloom, sold, gone. It's over to us. And a lot of the time when we get them, the media they're in is already breaking down, if not already broken down, and there's already root loss going on. So you've just bought a rescue plant, even though it might have some smashing blooms on it. It's what's in the pot. Yeah. So my advice, quite honestly, is get it out the pot. Have a look. If you've got a clear pot and you can see that all is well, then maybe not. But get down below the surface of the media and see if it's firm. You know, make sure it's not sort of soggy. And if it seems to stay wet too long, chances are it needs repotting. Yeah, get some air around those roots. They can grow mounted. I mean, I've got 5 Phalaenopsis now. 4 are mounted and 1's in a pot. Yeah, the mounted ones do okay, but they need watering a lot more often. Now these are what you would call a continuous grower. In their world, in the tropical rainforest, there's no winter. You know, there's a wet season and a drier season. It's not dry. If it was dry in a tropical rainforest, it wouldn't be a tropical rainforest, would it? The leaves would fall off the trees and the plants would complain, and all that lush green growth wouldn't be, because it didn't get enough water to support it. So a bit drier in winter perhaps, but continuous environment basically, nice and warm, nice and cosy. They don't need high light. They tend to be low growing in that forest environment, down near the forest floor or quite low down in the trees. They're not hanging out the top of the tree in full sun. So, you know, in the UK I'd say medium light levels. They're classed as shady growers, but you know, you have to bear in mind it's a strange statement. What is shady? I keep mine shaded by other plants, yeah? You know, the light level up near the roof in here is high. So they're underneath other plants that provide the shade for them. They don't want to grow in the dark. They need light, but I would suggest sunlight on the leaves is not the best of ideas unless it's real weak, wishy-washy winter sun, in which case a short period wouldn't do them any harm, I suppose, but they don't need it. So, you know, a medium-ish light level, I'd say less than Oncidium types. You know, that sort of thing. Certainly not Cattleya level. It's singe your leaves. Right, so that's the light level. Temperatures, they like to be warm. Most of them are up the high end of intermediate. Now in the house, that's probably what they're going to get, because we don't tend to have cold houses and sit round in our hat, gloves and scarf, do we? Yeah. So the chances are, if you're comfortable, so are they. So temperature range, I would suggest they like nothing less than about 16, 17, 18 degrees C as a cool end, you know, and they'll take heat. They can go right up into the higher temperatures. They're quite tolerant of humidity, the Phalaenopsis. They're not one of those that, you know, low humidity does them harm. They might do a bit better with some reasonable humidity, but they seem to put up with it. So they're pretty tolerant in that thing. But I think the most important thing with the Phalaenopsis is, because of how they grow and where they grow, they need a constant supply of feed all the time. So none of this, you know, high dose and then don't give them anything for a fortnight. They don't. Fogger's just come on. Hang on, I'll turn that off. It's not necessary at the moment, so I'll just press the right button. Why won't you turn off? Gotcha. Right, didn't hold the button long enough. Yeah, I mean, that's not necessary at the moment. Yeah, so humidity level's reasonable. You know, really, really dry air is no good for any orchid, really, but they're not too fussed. But this constant supply of feed is quite important. And they can be quite classed as quite high feeders, but it's more important to have a constant supply, and it just keeps them going. Now you can have new roots coming out, a spike growing, and a new leaf all going on at once. You know, well, they'll stall. If they don't get that constant stream of feed, they will stall, and something will give, and it'll either be a poor spike or blasted buds, depending on the stage the spike's at. You might get a small insignificant leaf come out because it didn't get enough food to push it on. Roots might be shorter than they should be, or all of those together. So a nice constant stream of suitable nutrition in a form that the plant can absorb, and it'll be happy and it'll grow. Now, we got this business of, oh, older leaves die back. Yes and no. I've got somebody in mind who grows brilliant Phalaenopsis, and all his old leaves don't drop off. You know why? A constant supply of feed. Yeah? If it's using its food to produce new leaves and it hasn't got enough, it will pull its resources off the old leaf and dump it. So your lower leaves will go. But under good conditions, that shouldn't happen often. And the plant should progressively get bigger. You know, it shouldn't stay the same size. You know, every new leaf doesn't warrant an old one dropping off. It's a consequence of not being hydrated and fed constantly. But that doesn't mean sitting them in water. In my environment, I I've either got them mounted, in which case their roots aren't really in much, bit of moss around some of them, and some of them are just attached to the bark. But in a pot, large chunky bark, plenty of air, give them a good soak, and when they dry, water them again. When they dry. Yeah? The roots will tell you, they go a silvery colour when they're dry, and when they're wet, they go green. It's simple. They tell you, you know, my roots are starting to get a bit silvery looking, I think I need a drink. There you go, and put some food in it. Yeah? You might need to flush your pots now and again, don't forget that. You know, you don't get build up in your pots or anything, but yeah, so constant supply of nutrients and hydration. Just keep them growing. Yeah, every bit of that plant wants to do something, and you will get times when it's doing nothing, or it doesn't seem to be. That doesn't mean you stop watering and stop feeding. Yeah, but they do have a little rest, some of them sometimes, but yeah, don't keep them dry too long, and don't stop feeding, quite honestly. I'd keep it going with those, just try and keep them active, and they should grow into larger and larger plants. They shouldn't keep dropping old leaves. What else on Phalaenopsis? We've done getting them out of their pot. We've done oh yeah, media for Phalaenopsis. Quite honestly, you could think of them in a way like giant Tolumnias. They don't really need to grow in anything, they need to grow on things. So they like to attach the new roots that grow from a Phalaenopsis, like to grab hold of something, they like to feel secure. Now that can be pebbles, the river rock type stuff, but that holds no water. So you give them a good soak and then they're dry. So you're going to be watering very frequently if they're not outside getting rained on. Yeah. So back away from that type of media into something that's still inorganic but does hold some water, something like lava rock. That'll do. They'll grow on that or in amongst it, that's fine. If you get into organic media, make sure it's something that's got some air around it and dries reasonably quickly. It doesn't need to dry in a day or anything like that, but it does need the ability to dry off with some air around the roots. And that's about it really. That's a non-Phalaenopsis grower's guide to growing Phalaenopsis. So you can believe it if you choose to, but I am not the best Phalaenopsis grower, and the main reason is my environment doesn't suit them. It's just too cold in the winter. So good luck with them, but I think the real bottom line is, at the point of purchase, is when you get your shiny new Phalaenopsis home, get down in that pot and see what's going on, and if it doesn't look right, yeah, then change it, get it done. You're more likely to lose the plant through root loss than anything else, quite honestly. They're pretty tolerant little beasties. So there we go, questions and answers, mixed and varied, and a chat about Phalaenopsis from a non-Phalaenopsis grower. See you next time.